These dumb, outrageously bright headlights are going to get us all killed, and I know, I already talked about this back in February 2025, about LED headlights and their dangerous lumen outputs, their physical and environmental effects, the perils of aftermarket retrofits, and why the US has been so slow to adopt adaptive beams. Getting me fired up, get my dander up, damn! But despite all of the petitions, all of the lobbying, and all of the proposed regulations, nothing seems to have changed. Even if we allow for the idea that the wheels of government turn slower than the rate of continental drift, people are still being blinded by the ocular assault of LEDs and adaptive beams that spray light all over creation like soda from a punctured can of ginger ale. Case in point, Tesla has spent 2 years fighting to be exempted from federal headlight standards on the premise that their illegally bright headlights don't have an effect on automotive safety, which that is so patently ridiculous I don't even know where to start, although I will get into their defense. But either way, the company is being forced now to recall a bunch of Model 3s and Model Ys, as more drivers than ever before are coming forward to complain that modern headlights are still too bright. And the reason is because these federal tests have serious flaws that can result in some dangerously bright vehicles slipping through the cracks with a stamp of approval. You know, for all of our jokes about how guys get lifted trucks so they're closer to the Lord, the possibility remains that driving opposite a car with LED headlights will get you closer to the afterlife than all the iBox springs in the world. But there is hope. It's just that, for better or worse, it all depends on the world's oldest and most consistent avenue for change: legislation.
Roman report, and I'm following up, and I make what I want when I feel like discussing cars again.
Alright, so what's changed since my video last February? Well, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, in partnership with the Highway Loss Data Institute, cited a study last October which found that while complaints about headlight brightness were increasing, there was no actual evidence to suggest that they were making the roads inherently more dangerous, as data collected from 2015 to 2023 found that headlight glare was only cited as a factor in 1 or 2 out of every 1,000 nighttime crashes across 11 different US states. And that's good, right? I mean, things are improving, and the argument in defense of the auto industry is that for whatever damage headlight brightness might cause, far less damage is done by those headlights than by people not getting their headlights properly aligned, or by people replacing their factory headlights with overly bright aftermarket options. And it's absolutely true that both of these are issues within the automotive community, but I'm not sure that the IIHS's study supports the notion that things are actually improving, because the problem with bright headlights, in my opinion, is not just the immediate localized potential to cause a crash, but the accumulation of harm over time. The gradual erosion of people's vision that makes them lousier drivers, and the constant glare that makes motorists less confident of their nighttime driving abilities and makes them more hesitant, and thereby much lousier drivers, because all roads lead back to how this affects your ability to drive safely and to drive competently and confidently. And this is without even getting into how exposure to bright headlights can cause physiological responses such as heightened stress or disposition towards road rage and other stupid outcomes. or just the plain old enthusiast rationale that these headlights are simply making it less enjoyable to even be on the road after dark, one of the best times to go for a drive. For me personally, I love just a modest amount of rain, AC set to recirculating, and maybe like a spooky podcast. That is ideal for me. But despite the IIHS survey suggesting that it doesn't appear as though accidents have gone up as a result of bright headlights, concern over their effect on drivers' ability to actually drive has gone up. AAA conducted a survey back in March of this year that found that 6 in 10 drivers cite glare as a serious problem when driving after dark. And 73% of those affected believe that the problem has grown worse over the past decade. Now, I've linked the survey in the description, and you'll be able to see how different communities of drivers are and aren't affected by bright headlights. For instance, it's not exactly a huge surprise that pickup truck drivers are significantly less likely to report glare than virtually any other vehicle type, since they're riding higher and aren't exposed to those lights directly. But even though women drivers report glare more often than men at a rate of 70% to 57%, this doesn't seem to be due to women typically being shorter, since the survey found that a driver's height doesn't actually have any significant influence on the likelihood of experiencing glare. It has to do with the vehicle you're driving and the roadway you're driving on, with 2-lane roads posing the biggest challenge to respondents, followed by highways and then multi-lane non-highway roads, and finally neighborhood roads. But while AAA found remarkable gains in automatic emergency pedestrian braking technology due to the increased visibility modern headlights provide, I'm not sure it's entirely safe to say that automakers have worked out all of the kinks in the time since my last video. Which brings us to August 2026. Because while Tesla has indeed spent more than 2 years fighting for a recall exemption, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has finally denied Tesla's petition. As a result, on August 4th, Tesla issued a recall affecting 20,349 vehicles. In particular, Tesla Model 3s from model years 2017 to 2023, and Tesla Model Ys from model years 2020 to 2023, that were equipped with headlights that were manufactured by Tesla's former headlight supplier, Marelli Automotive Lighting. But the reason for this recall was not as straightforward as the headlights simply being too bright. Per the ruling, it was determined that the low beam output of Tesla's headlights exceeded the maximum allowed intensity as prescribed by Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard number 108, the federal standard governing headlight operation. Let me put it simply, it's basically that one of Safety Standard 108's most important distinctions is not just a measurement of brightness, but a measurement of candela, or the amount of light that travels in a particular direction. So the goal is for the light to hit the road without excessively spilling over to where it doesn't belong. In this case, 10 to 90 degrees above the horizon line of a driver's field of vision. That upper portion of the low beam pattern is capped at 125 candela, but some of Tesla's lamps reached 230.1 candela, or 84% over the legal limit. So to clarify, it's not that the lights are 84% brighter than legally allowed, it's that these headlamps were allowing 84% more light into that restricted upper zone. And all that extra light is not supposed to be there. In essence, the headlights Tesla was using were made the same way I make peanut butter sandwiches. Like, in theory, the peanut butter should be contained within the confines of the bread, but I use that oily kind of peanut butter that you gotta stir, so it ends up spilling beyond the crust line entirely and becomes an ungovernable mess. As is tradition! Initially, Tesla had argued for an exemption by claiming their headlights were unlikely to cause direct glare, since all that excess light was concentrated outside the direct sight line of the driver. But the test they failed wasn't even for direct glare, it was for something called veiling glare, which is when the light sort of disperses through bad weather and makes it harder to see, because the headlights aren't making the road easier to see, they're just making the bad weather brighter. So that, for instance, instead of seeing through the fog or that sheet of rain, you just have a brighter blanket of fog or a shimmering curtain of rain in front of you. You can't see because there's no contrast, and without contrast, you might as well be driving with your eyes closed for all the detail you'd be able to make out anyway. Despite the fact that Tesla doesn't even do business with Marelli Automotive lighting anymore, those previous model year vehicles are still affected, so they had to issue a recall. And to be fair, Tesla has been far from the only automaker who's had to do this in the past calendar year. I dredged up some NHTSA safety recall reports from the last 16-ish months, and they make the Model 3 and Model Y recall look downright modest in comparison to some of the others that have been issued in that time frame. For instance, Tesla recalled 63,619 Cybertrucks in October 2025 due to a software error that causes the front parking lights to become way too intense, as the incel Camino continues to have more issues than a newspaper stand at the Port Authority, to where I'm not sure what the point of even owning one of these things is, much less at the price you have to pay to get one, and for what it will tell the world about you once you do. I am convinced a Cybertruck remains the most anyone can pay to be humiliated without receiving sexual gratification from it. Unless. But the hits keep on coming because back in June, Ford recalled 91,198 F-150s for a similar issue in which the daytime running lights failed to dim into parking lights once switched to the low beam position. Which doesn't sound too bad until you find out that this is basically a recall, since this was issued initially back in 2020 for select 2018 to 2020 F-150s. However, the recall needed to be reissued because, quote, according to Ford's records, certain 2018 to 2020 model year Ford F-150 vehicles did not have the remedy for safety recall 20C03/20V-097 installed correctly, but were recorded as having the repair successfully completed. End quote. So because the recalls were mistakenly reported as having been performed the first time, they have to run it back like Jey Uso's entrance theme. And it doesn't stop there either, because in March of this year, Ford recalled 35,772 Explorers from model years 2025 to 2026 due to incorrect headlight control module software that could result in impaired visibility for the driver and oncoming motorists. But what I find unsettling isn't the amount of cars that have been recalled as a result of failing Safety Standard 108. It's the number of cars that aren't being recalled because they somehow passed. Of course, the word passed is doing a lot of heavy lifting here because it all comes down to how the NHTSA conducts its tests, which I think might just be the biggest problem facilitating this bright headlight crisis. You see, the tests that the NHTSA conducts are fairly rigorous once they actually conduct them, but the flaw is in the selection process for the vehicles they test. The NHTSA's chief counsel explained their testing process in a response letter to an inquiry about it, and the explanation didn't really fill me with hope. Quote, NHTSA does not provide approvals of motor vehicles or motor vehicle equipment. Instead, manufacturers are required to self-certify that their products conform to all applicable safety standards that are in effect on the date of manufacture, before they can be offered for sale. Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard No. 108 sets forth the requirements for both new and replacement motor vehicle lighting equipment. NHTSA selects a sampling of new vehicles and equipment each year to determine their compliance with applicable federal motor vehicle safety standards. If our testing or examination reveals an apparent non-compliance, we may require the manufacturer to remedy the non-compliance and may initiate an enforcement proceeding, if necessary, to ensure that the manufacturer takes appropriate action. End quote. So automakers essentially conduct their own tests and then submit the results to the NHTSA, who then tests sample vehicles from the fleet, and then they can tell automakers either, hey, you're good, or yo, you need to fix this. We need a recall here, you know? But it's basically luck of the draw as to whether a faulty model with illegally bright headlights lands in their lap. This is all pretty much operating on the honor system, like one of those classes where the students get to give themselves a grade. You can double check that students are being truthful about their assessment of their own work in a class of 30 kids. But when we're talking about fleets of hundreds of thousands of cars each model year, it's going to be impossible for the NHTSA to keep up. And that's sort of the defense you can go with for the NHTSA, because in the interest of fairness, I think it's unrealistic to expect that the NHTSA inspects individual headlight assemblies on every single car off the factory line. But I also feel like their testing methodology provides a blanket certification received too easily. I mean, only a handful of cars need to pass. And in a way, it's a bizarre mirror of the crash test study from the IIHS, that because glare was only cited in 1 or 2 out of every 1,000 accidents across 11 states, bright headlights are somehow this overstated problem, when 11 states is kind of a small sample size when you consider how huge the United States really is. But then I'm not the professional methodologist or whatever you call somebody who runs surveys and conducts, like a data scientist, more or less. So, I don't know, maybe I'm tilting at windmills here, but I genuinely feel like the testing process relying so heavily on automakers to self-report is fundamentally flawed, even if it's true that it's in the automaker's best financial interest to catch these issues before they happen, and even if it's also true that prior to arguing that they deserved an exemption, Tesla initiated their headlight recall themselves. All of those things can be true, while still acknowledging that automakers will make mistakes and government entities will fail to catch them, because they're all comprised of humans who can make mistakes. And this would be true even if all of this testing were automated, God forbid. Mistakes happen, and I'm not sure what safeguards are in place beyond automakers self-reporting or independent third parties cracking the case on their own. And it's this latter point I want to zoom in on, because this is exactly how a federally certified 2025 Chevrolet Silverado 1500 passed government testing, only to fail when subsequently tested by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, as the test vehicle's low-beam LEDs exceeded the IIHS's own glare threshold by more than 200%. And okay, different institutions have different testing standards and thresholds. But this shows that even vehicles that can pass Safety Standard 108 are not exempt from emitting more light than they should. And to stay in this for a bit, the IIHS also tested some trims of the 2026 BMW i4 that passed government certification. And the result was that their headlights were judged to be either marginal or poor by their rating system. Of course, the Institute makes a point of noting that it really depends on the trim level and features here, but it still wasn't exactly a hugely optimistic result. The Shadowline package versions of the eDrive 35, the eDrive 40, and xDrive 40, and the base M50 trims received the marginal rating due to the high beams, but the models that received the poorer rating were the standard eDrive 35, eDrive 40, and xDrive 40 trims, which were found to have low beams that, quote, created excessive glare, end quote, and high beams that, on a straightaway, created inadequate visibility on both sides of the road, with only fair visibility on curves. And I feel like an unsettling implication here is that the base trim isn't even the one with the good headlights, like the most accessible trim has the worst headlights. I get that you have to pay more for better features, but I don't know, it just seems really backwards. Now, the copium here is that the IIHS's own headlight rating system has contributed to the data that headlights today are generally safer. Around 16% of headlights from current model year vehicles were found to be poor, which is a massive reduction from when the IIHS began rating manufacturer headlights in 2016. Back then, 82% were either marginal or poor. So that leads to the uncomfortable truth that there is measurable improvement even if it doesn't feel like there is. But then it's important to note that just at a kind of common sense level, people not citing glare in crash reports is not the same thing as saying that glare has no effect on the general experience of driving. People are suffering from diminished nighttime driving capacity as a result of these headlights, if respondents to surveys are to be believed, which I'm inclined to say they are, because why would you take the time to do a survey and just lie? It doesn't make sense if they're unpaid surveys. Case in point, British driving services brand RAC published research in February of this year that was supported by the College of Optometrists, which found that over half of UK drivers who are dazzled by headlights, or roughly 57% of respondents, say that the problem has gotten worse in the past year, with half of all respondents noting that headlight glare has made it difficult to see road hazards, markings, or signs. About 42% say they're no longer able to confidently judge the distance or speed of oncoming vehicles. Now, for whatever it's worth, there is some good news in this situation here. Well, potential good news. In March 2026, Representative Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez introduced a bill known as H.R. 7772, or the Light Safety Act, with the goal of forcing the U.S. Department of Transportation and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to set standards for maximum allowable brightness for vehicle low-beam headlights within 1 year. But the problem is expecting anything to get done in current political climate. But hey, at least things seem to be happening for our neighbors up north. Similar to the Light Safety Act, a parliamentary petition was introduced in the Canadian House of Commons to update safety standards, and it resulted in Transport Canada, the federal agency governing transportation, deciding to solicit opinions on headlight brightness directly from the populace. And the survey received responses from nearly 380,000 people, overwhelming their system so significantly that, despite the survey having closed months ago, Transport Canada is still sorting through responses before publishing their findings. Say whatever you want about the effectiveness of surveys, but the fact that over 250,000 people responded at all is huge, because it signifies just how important this issue is to drivers, irrespective of whether or not these headlights are directly leading to more crashes. I mean, would you take time out of a perfectly fine day to fill out a survey from the government if bright headlights were just a mild inconvenience? People are sick of them in Canada. They're sick of them here. They're sick of them in the UK, where the College of Optometrists found that 1/4 of the people who responded to their survey have admitted to giving up night driving altogether, and an additional 16% said that they hate it, but they don't really have a choice because, for whatever reason, whether it's work or some other responsibility, they have to drive at night. This is a worldwide issue that goes way beyond whatever accidents bright headlights could cause. Because what this is all saying is that automakers and legislators have been gaslighting people for years by suggesting that these headlights aren't a problem, that it's really just the road conditions, or prescription glasses, or the driver's height, or whatever the hell excuse makes sense at that moment. But drivers are legitimately tired of being told that something they're experiencing virtually every single time they're on the road after dark isn't worth theirs or anybody else's concern. And yes, automakers and legislators appear to be acting now, to be making more concerted efforts to initiate recalls, to make sure that their headlights are calibrated, and to make sure that consumers are informed that they also need to get their headlights aligned and recalibrated. And I can also understand why automakers and legislators have been slow to move, especially when data supports that crashes are not meaningfully affected by headlight brightness. But I still want to push back against that, because I'm not sure it's always possible to make a direct correlation between bright headlights and fatal car accidents. The correlation is sometimes fairly indirect, honestly. I don't think it's this huge revelation to say that car accidents aren't typically straightforward. I mean, yeah, sometimes they are. Sometimes somebody slams the brakes in front of you and you have a fender bender, or sometimes an impaired driver just keeps going and doesn't stop, and that's it. Or you're driving behind a logging truck and you've seen Final Destination enough times to know how that goes. But a lot of times, car accidents are a perfect storm, a sort of casserole of causation, with little ingredients that come together to make a larger dish that nobody wants to sample. Bright headlights don't have to be the primary cause in order to contribute to an accident. Maybe the headlights interrupted the natural patterns of wildlife in the area, their circadian rhythms, or their ability for their eyes to adjust to this new, increased output of light. I mean, we have the term deer in the headlights for a reason. Even if you're not being blinded by headlights, that doesn't mean those headlights can't still create problems by causing animals to become disoriented, which can result in an accident that can be cited as having been caused by an animal in the road, rather than by the headlights that contributed to that animal being in the road in the first place. While ultimately, most drivers view these headlights as an irritant that is making the act of driving less enjoyable, even if it isn't necessarily more dangerous. The reality is that bright headlights can compound the issues that lead to potential accidents, in the form of eye fatigue, headaches, road rage, stress, and the gradual erosion of a driver's confidence in what their eyes appear to be showing them. And we're all just supposed to get off the roads before dark and find shelter like some sort of reverse vampire, and all because people spent too long trying to deny the system was comprehensively screwed up. and that some sort of regulation is not imperative for change to actually happen. I don't think a 12-car pileup should have to happen before safety standards for headlight brightness are updated so that nobody has to feel like they're opening the Ark of the Covenant every time they dare to drive after 6 p.m. For me personally, I feel like the best way forward is not just updating the safety standards to factor in all the increased lumens and candela these headlights produce, but also reform the testing procedures, testing a larger number of sample models from each automaker, and conducting tests under a larger array of different weather conditions and different terrain, including stuff like tunnels and underpasses and twisty back roads or wooded areas at different levels of elevation, if they're not already doing this. And if they are already doing this and the system still feels like it's coming up short, then, well, I guess I'll just have to put it out there to the public to offer up their suggestions for what the answer is, because I have no loving idea what it is. But what I do know is that the whole point of safety regulations is to prevent the preventable, rather than to provide plausible deniability when the worst happens. To say like, oh, we did everything we could, we passed the safety tests, it's not our fault. We shouldn't have to wait for the worst to happen in order to see real change, especially when arguably more people are vocal about this issue than at any other point in the history of the automobile. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please like, comment, subscribe, share the video, click the bell icon so you're notified for every new video, and keep an eye out for me in the comments section. I want to hear from you about your overly bright headlight stories and your bright headlight solutions, and like how we fix all of this, if we even can put the toothpaste back in the tube. Now, if you want to support the channel in the biggest possible way and want to support me to continue making videos just like this, Patreon is the best way forward. You can get these videos early and ad-free for just $1, along with other exclusive content that you'll never see here. But even while any one of those things would be immensely appreciated, your viewership is enough. Thank you so much for watching, and have an outstanding rest of your week.